So friends, today we'll be talking about Vedic Soma. We'll be tracking it through ancient world history. As you are aware that there are four ancient civilizations which are commonly taught to students. So we'll be talking about those four main civilizations, starting with westernmost civilization of Mesopotamia, while the sun rises in the east. But we'll be focusing on the west because of the fact that history is always mostly written by victorious man, the people who are more powerful. So taking a clue from that, we'll be talking about starting from the west, because the western civilization seems to be dominating the current world right now. So starting from Mesopotamia, we are trying to trace Soma. So for tracing Soma, we will have to look at what all substances they were using. And please note that here we'll be focusing about main substances, not the fringe substances. The logic for focusing on the main substances is that there will be archaeological evidence for usage of those substances. There will be gods or goddesses associated with those substances. That may not be true for fringe substances. Anyone can claim that, okay, magic mushroom was used here and there, but then it is difficult to find archaeological trace or any specific god associated with that sort of substance. So our focus will be to basically trace the important substances, key substances which were worshipped or used in those civilizations. The one key argument for focusing on main substances, not fringe substances, is that Vedic Soma is relevant in the context of 1 billion Hindu people of India. When we are talking about 1 billion people, it is clear that we should not talk about any fringe culture, because to assume that a fringe culture would have resulted into a following by 1 billion people, 100 crore people, I think that is over a stretch. So therefore, instead of focusing on fringe elements, we'll be talking about key substances. So starting from Mesopotamia, if we look at the history of ancient Mesopotamia, two things emerged. There is a substance which was called as hulgil. People are now saying that that substance was opium. There was also a goddess associated with opium or poppy. That goddess was called Menon goddess. So in Mesopotamia, there's a clear-cut evidence of usage of opium. Of course, alcohol was used, but I will not be focusing on alcohol because alcohol was almost used in all four civilizations which we'll talk today. But alcohol is not Soma, because that is clear from the Rigveda itself. Rigveda has a second category, Sura, for alcoholic beverages. So therefore, we are not focusing on alcoholic beverages as such. We are talking about substances other than alcohol which were popular or which were in use in ancient world. So coming back to Mesopotamia, so as I said that there was a goddess associated with poppy. That goddess was named as Menon goddess. This substance was also found in cemetery of various people in Mesopotamian civilization, including Sumerian civilization, with which Indian civilization has some linkage. We will talk about linkage in other videos. But for the time being, it's become clear, it is clear from the archaeological evidences, it is clear from the gods they were worshipping, that opium was quite popular in ancient Mesopotamia. I invite all of you to do your own research through AI or Google. I am sure that people will also come up with a similar finding, that apart from alcohol, opium was in heavy use, or opium was worshipped. There was a goddess associated with opium in Mesopotamian civilization. Now, Mesopotamian civilization gave birth to certain other civilizations in the West, like Greek civilization and Roman civilization. So in the Greek civilization also, if we were to look at substances which were used, of course alcohol was used. Apart from alcohol, we see evidence of opium usage. There is also a goddess Demeter who is associated with opium. So even in the Greek world, opium was present, it was celebrated, it was worshipped. Now moving further west to Roman civilization. In Roman civilization also we see ample evidence of usage of opium. Of course, there are archaeological evidences, but apart from archaeological evidences, if we were to look at Roman gods, then we find the at least three gods who are associated with opium in Roman civilization. Of course, they might not be god all three gods at one point of time. They might be gods representing different points of time in Roman history, but there are three gods. So those gods are named as Hypnosis, then Hypnos, from whom this term hypnosis has been derived. So Hypnos god was there in the Roman culture. That god was also associated with opium. Then there is also Morpheus god in Roman civilization. Again, that name is similar to the morphine or other chemical substances which are named after opium these days. So Morpheus is again a Roman god associated with opium. Then there is one other god, Somnus, who's Somnus. His name is quite similar to Soma of our Rigveda. He is also associated with opium, and he's a god of sleep, and he's associated with opium. So, to summarize, in the context of Mesopotamian civilization, we see very high evidence of usage of opium. We see ample gods, whether we are talking about Mesopotamian civilization or Greek civilization or Roman civilization, all have gods associated with opium. So summary of this is that it is, I think, quite clear that opium was quite a important substance in these civilizations, and there were gods associated with opium. Now we will move to Egypt. Egypt is another great civilization in the ancient world. In fact, in the ancient world, while Indus Valley Civilization was considered to be most advanced civilization, Egypt was considered to be the most wealthiest civilization, maybe because of the geography or other factors. But they were wealthiest. If we talk about opium usage in Egypt, again, there are ample evidences of opium usage in ancient Egypt. We are talking about substances, again, we are talking about substances other than alcohol. So in Egypt, we find two gods which are of interest to us. One god who is Osiris. Osiris is, while he is associated with alcohol, then there's other god, Thoth. Similar, it is pronounced similar to thought. So Thoth god is associated with opium. In fact, there is a very similarity between him and Soma. Thoth god is also associated. Thoth god is also associated with the moon god, similar to Soma in India. Thoth god is also associated with opium, similar to Soma in India. Leaving aside Soma for time being, because my theory is that this Soma has been inspired by Thoth, or other way around, the Thoth god was inspired by Soma. We can't be for certain, but if we were to look from archaeology perspective, then clearly in Egyptian culture, Thoth seems to be older than Soma in India. But leaving aside that, our key focus for time being is that opium was very much in use, very popular in even ancient Egypt. There are also instances of use of opium, keeping opium in the death cemetery of kings who have died, or businessmen who have died. So there are ample evidences to that. It becomes clear that even Egypt was worshipping opium. There was high demand for opium in Egyptian culture. So two cultures basically of Western nature, basically Mesopotamia as well as Egypt, both were using opium. Now we'll be traveling to other civilization, Indus Valley Civilization, and then talk about Chinese civilization, Yellow River Civilization as well. And then there's a fifth element as well, Indo-Scythians or Scythians. We will talk about that. So coming to now Indus Valley Civilization, Indus Valley Civilization's script of Indus Valley Civilization has not been deciphered yet. There is a controversy as to whether that script is Dravidian script or a Proto-Indian, Indo-Iranian script or something else. There is confusion. Many people are coming up with their own interpretation. While my view is on the basis of various factors that it is likely to be proto-Buddhist, mainly because of the fact that two key arguments I will present for it being a proto-Buddhist. That is, first is that we see wheels, ample amount of six spooked wheels. That wheel is later associated with Buddhism in India. So that is one argument. Second is that when we see stupas in Indus Valley Civilization, while mainstream theory as of now argues it to be a later development of AD era, but there are scientists or archaeologists, even Western archaeologists, who are now saying that these stupas date back to 2000 BC or 2500 BC. So those stupas might be originally belonging from Indus Valley Civilization. And more importantly, and key argument is that Indus Valley Civilization is always seen as a peaceful civilization. There was no instruments for war and fighting. We all know that Vedic civilization was not a peaceful civilization. There is a lot of talk about wars and killing each other, killing other persons and fighting with other civilizations in Veda. So Veda is definitely not representative of Indus Valley civilization in that way. So therefore, my theory is that it is likely to be proto-Buddhist, but leaving aside that for time being, in some videos we'll talk about that as well. But coming back to our main topic, so what substance were in use in Indus Valley Civilization apart from alcohol? Alcohol was of course used in Indus Valley Civilization as well. So apart from alcohol, we can see ample evidence of usage of cannabis, while recent archaeological evidences are not endorsing cannabis as such, that they have found cannabis in Indus Valley Civilization. That may be because of the format of usage of cannabis in India. In most popular form of usage of cannabis in India in ancient world seems to be edible cannabis, that is bhang. So in that format, there is no scope of finding any archaeological traces of substance present. But of course, it is well accepted by everyone, historian, archaeologist, and everyone, that in India and China, these two civilizations were using cannabis since time immemorial. So they has been using it for a very long time. So Indus Valley Civilization was using, in a way, cannabis as well as alcohol. We are more concerned about cannabis here because we are talking about substances other than alcohol. Now, Indus Valley there is a dispute whether Lord Shiva was there in Indus Valley Civilization or not. There is one picture that has been interpreted by some people as to representing Lord Shiva, his Pasupatinath version, but that is disputed. But anyway, if we were to extend what's happened in Indus Valley Civilization or in later civilization, it is clear that there are Indian gods associated with cannabis. Most important god which is associated with cannabis is Lord Shiva, who is considered a god of destruction in mainstream, but his followers also consider him as a supreme god, as a god who is a creator, preserver, as well as destroyer. So Lord Shiva, of course, is associated in a way loosely with Indus Valley, or basically descendants of Indus Valley Civilization as well. So in India, cannabis becomes a sacred plant as opposed to opium, which was a sacred plant in Egypt and in Mesopotamia and Roman and Greek civilization. Now, moving to China. In China, there is was oldest recorded usage of cannabis. There is also a god Sen Nong, who is associated with discovering Chinese. His book, Farmer's Divine, Divine Book of Herbs. That book also talks about cannabis. So In China as well, cannabis was known even in the BC era for quite long time. It is possible that in fact Chinese people started using cannabis first, and then that was transported to India in some form or fashion. Or it is possible that both civilization, India and China, started using cannabis independently. Here, I would like to point out that the linkage between India and China, or linkage between Sino-Tibetan languages and Indian languages, is not emphasized that much. That is mainly, in my understanding, because of the fact that all these civilizations, that is even Chinese civilizations and Indian civilizations, were in a way not very powerful. In fact, weak civilizations in the 18th and 19th century, when all this history was written by Western people. So they choose to ignore, and even Indian people endorse that view, that they choose to ignore our connections with China and Tibet, and some connections with Iran and larger Western world, were manufactured, or basically they were exemplified. If let's say that the connection was 20%, that 20% was made 80%. And in the case of Sino-Tibetan connection, if the connection was, let's say, 60%, that connection was made 10-20%. And that again ties in perfectly with the theory that history is always written by victor or more powerful people. So that, because of that, there might have been some lost connection between Indian and Chinese civilization. But cannabis was there in the both civilization. Now, if we, why I'm saying that there might be a lost connection between these two civilizations, if we look at the ethos of these two civilizations are primarily peaceful civilizations. All religions which thrived in these civilizations, like Buddhism, Jainism, or Taoism in China, they were mainly focusing on peace as opposed to war. Of course, they were saying that war, whenever it's necessary, it can be pursued, but these are peaceful civilizations. Uh, so, friends, in this context, I think one more important point comes into mind, that these two civilizations, which are basically using cannabis, that is India and China, they are considered to be peaceful civilization, while two other civilizations which are using opium, like Mesopotamian civilization or other Far East civilizations and Egyptian civilization, they were basically considered prone to war, especially Mesopotamian civilization, from where opium emerged, that was more prone to war, and in a way they were always fighting with each other. While till this point of time, mainstream history teaches us that geography decides destiny. But I think it is oversimplification to say that geography decides destiny. It is quite, geography, of course, plays an important part in deciding destiny of any country, but it is important part. It is not a sole factor. My submission is that even the substances or the foods which people eat, that also decides destiny of that particular civilization. Buddha has a famous quote that you become what you eat. So food basically decides our thinking pattern and our everything. So from that perspective, while of course it's not established theory, I think one should consider the possibility that these two civilizations, Indian and Chinese civilizations, were comparatively peaceful civilization because they were using cannabis, mostly edible cannabis, which was leading to dissolution of egos, and in a way then making them think more about connections with others, consciousness, peaceful coexistence, factors like that. Contrast that with opium. Opium, people eating or using opium, they are more prone to war. And even I think any person who have used both these substances, if one were to compare experience after opium and after cannabis, edible cannabis, mainly I'm talking about edible cannabis, then you'll see clearly that opium is the one who after eating opium, one feels powerful, one feels that okay, I am ready to fight or slightly aggressive. Of course, I am not saying that all people using opium tend to think that way, but the chances of being aggressive, chances of going to war after opium is much more higher, and it does not have a psychedelic effect. So you are not thinking about oneness with the world, or basically your inner divinity or consciousness. You are focusing more on the external world after usage of opium, while after usage of cannabis, you are focusing more on your inner world. And I think that is also one of the reason that Indian and Chinese civilization, even till date, they are more inward looking. In India, we are very happy with declaring ourselves Vishwaguru. We are not concerned whether what other people are thinking. Similarly, in China also, you'll find that they have too much pride in treating them as middle kingdom, and there are various other terms. So we see these two civilizations, they are more inward looking, more spiritual in the sense, is spiritual not in the sense of spirit, is spiritual in the sense of more connection with the nature. And the other civilizations which were using opium, they were more prone to war. And in all these mix of four civilizations, these four civilizations were well established civilizations, and their history is well documented in a way. But there was another factor, and I think that factor is also of no surprise if we were to look at our today's world. That factor is basically Scythians. Scythians, that is the people who are considered to come from Russia and Ukraine side. They were attacking Indus Valley Civilization. They were attacking Iranian civilization or Oxus civilization, and they were settling in these sorts of civilizations. There is evidence that they were using opium before war. Of course, people have also linked them with the cannabis, but my reading is that the linking cannabis with Indo-Scythians was basically in a way attempt to defame cannabis. This is coming from Herodotus in his book Histories. He is the first author who has talked about usage of cannabis by these Scythian people who were attacking Indus Valley and Iranian civilizations. But as we all know, or any user of cannabis is endorsed that cannabis is not a substance which will help you when you are going to war or when you are going to fight. It is the opium which will use. So my submission is that Herodotus, uh, while he was aware that cannabis was being used in other parts like India and China, he might have equated with it with usage by Indo-Scythians, with a view to basically not defame his opium, because opium was in heavy usage in the civilization to which he belongs, and instead to defame cannabis. That happens in the history. There are ample evidences. We'll talk about various such evidences in the future. So here, linking of substance cannabis with Scythians, I think they were not using. They might be using it for recreational purposes. They were using. There are people saying now that there are archaeological evidence that they were smoking cannabis. So they might be smoking cannabis, but I am from my reading of the history, it becomes to me it is clear that they were not using edible cannabis. They were mainly using opium before going to war. Uh, like Herodotus, we see even in the Arabian Nights book belonging to medieval era. Again, we see an attempt by authors of Arabian Nights to defame cannabis, basically talking about a stoner's head and other thing, but at the same time not talking about opium users. So we have to read history from the perspective of which person is writing that history, what was his vested interest, or in a way prejudice. If I'm coming from a culture, I might have my own prejudice. I also might have my own prejudice, but being a lawyer, I try to be very open-minded, open to all sorts of evidences. And if there is an evidence, that one thing I have learned from my practice in court, that if there is an evidence, you will have to open your mind and accept that evidence. So from that perspective, I think Indo-Scythians, they were using opium. So we see in the civilizations, basically three civilizations, key civilizations. They were mostly two civilizations for sure: Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were using opium a lot. Indo-Scythians were also using opium before going to war, and then we see two other civilizations which were using cannabis. Now we will come back to our quest for Soma, that in this context, what is Soma? So in this context, friends, as we have talked in other episodes, in this context, basically Soma is referring to two substances, both these substances which were quite popular in the ancient world, but it is writing in such a manner that it becomes vague. So for example, first is plant description. So plant descriptions, if we were to focus on a plant description as such, then that plant description will take us to ephedra. Now, if we were to look at the method of preparation, then that method of preparation will lead us to basically cannabis, edible cannabis. And if we look at its effect primarily in the context of usage before war. Of course, there are effects of Soma also described in the context of love and other things in Rigveda, but its main usage is there in the context of usage before war. So in that context, it's come close to opium. But the key substance which was being used was not ephedra. Ephedra is a late addition, and it is possible that at the time of writing, composing Rigveda, they tried to make it more vague and link plant description with ephedra. But the two substances which were mainly in use, as we have seen, is opium. Opium was used in Sumerian civilization, and that civilization also has some. There is one archaeological finding which says that there is a mention of gods like Indra, Varun, and other gods in Sumerian civilization. There is one treaty between Hittite and Mitanni civilization. In that civilization, there is a mention of these gods. So, taking a clue from there, opium was being mentioned, but it was written in a language that even bhang or edible cannabis can fit in the picture. So Soma, so that is the basically description of the Soma. Now I think that's enough for today, but I'll leave with one important thought. That is, I think that the role of intoxicants or role of food is basically. We think that is secondary, but I think the food results in some thought, and that thoughts leads us to some action. So therefore that's not secondary. It is not, I will end with this, that it is not mere coincidence that you will find all people who are considered great conquerors or great philosophers or great scientists today, most of them have been using some intoxicating substance or other. For example, if you look at Alexander the Great, he was known for holding booze parties and competition for booze. Then we come to other basically Persian kings like Xerxes. He is also was using opium. There were ample kings in Egypt also who are using opium. In India, there is no evidence of usage of cannabis by kings and others. But of course, we know that many rishis and other people were using cannabis. Even in the modern day world, we find that people like Elon Musk, they openly admit that they are using psychedelics with a view to manage their stress or to open up their mind. So I think there has been less stress on the fact that intoxicant have played an important role in deciding the destiny of civilizations or deciding the future course of the civilization. I will end it here today with that thought. Thank you, friends.